The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. So get ready to email us or post a message to us. We are looking forward to speaking with you and responding to your questions. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, right to your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
I'm so glad to be with you here again today, and Happy New Year. This is the first show of the new year. This is Dr. Anna Baranowski, and we are bearing witness to evolving mind, mood, health. Today's show is on loneliness, and I think this is a massive topic, and it's one of those topics that are considered kind of the tipping point of potentially somebody slipping into a place where they are really not doing well in their life, as opposed to being able to thrive and to cope. 3 out of every 5 adults, or 61%, report that they sometimes or always feel lonely, according to a U.S. loneliness index. And, you know, it's even a bigger issue among young workers, like those people who are, early in their careers, something, 18 to 22, 73% report sometimes they're always feeling lonely. And these numbers actually, they keep getting worse. A year ago, that number was 69%. Now it's 73%. So this tells us that there's something of a loneliness epidemic, something that is impacting so many people. And really, from what I've seen, it's not really so much to do with whether you're a good person or a nice person or easy to get along with or capable of making friends. There's just so much going on. The demands are so extreme in our lives that sometimes we find ourselves getting deeper and deeper into the well of loneliness. And it's hard to pull yourself out of it because, for most people, making connections and keeping connections is really a day-to-day, week-to-week effort. Like, the people who seem to do the best are the ones who actually make time for connection, make it a priority, ensure that they've got some way of being with people in their lives, even if it's a cup of coffee or, going for a walk in a park or, visiting an art gallery or doing something on a really regular basis. So this becomes a really important thing. But just because of the demands of our day, we can find ourselves getting disconnected. This gets much worse when we've experienced massive trauma, because we may have now a tendency to isolate because our fear response has become so acute and so distressing. So instead of being able to keep up with the things that really make a difference, those connections are an incredible buffer to our day-to-day well-being. And what we're finding from the research is that with isolation and loneliness, lonely feelings, we have an increase in anxiety and depression. So it kind of creates this terrible generator of worse and worse feelings and an increased tendency to do the exact same thing that keeps us isolated. So we feel the loneliness, but then we feel more and more anxious and depressed, and we feel less likely to do the things that really could make a difference. So sometimes we have to become very creative in breaking down these habits that lead to loneliness. Now, today we have a very interesting guest. His name is Fareed Yagini, and he was actually a former member of Canadian Armed Forces, and he began Camp Aftermath after he left the military. And, you know, according to what I understand of Fareed, he had experienced a lot of traumatic events while overseas, but he did not develop post-traumatic stress, which is something I do see with people, that they can be exposed to trauma and not actually develop the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And so we're going to hear a little bit more from Fareed about what he thinks is the reason for his ability to be exposed to trauma and somehow manage to not develop PTSD. So this is a really worthwhile story for us to contemplate. So Fareed is now working with Camp Aftermath, and he is conducting these trips overseas to Costa Rica as part of a 3-phase program in which they start with screening to see if people are ready to engage in a group trip to Costa Rica for individuals who are military, paramilitary, first responders, to come together and anchor their experiences in something that is meaningful and positive after being exposed to trauma. So this, I think, is really worth spending some time reflecting on. And Fareed, maybe we can just hear a little bit from you about what your thoughts are about what you've seen on the programs you've already led.
Hi, Anna. Thanks so much, first of all, for having me on. An amazing experience and an honor to be here. So Camp Aftermath basically was created because it was something that came into play after I returned from my deployments. And I was lucky enough to become part of this kind of unofficial study upon returning from deployment. And based on like why was I, not just me obviously, a small group of us who were okay, and some of our friends and comrades were suffering. So what was kind of cool about this experience, and really a blessing in my part, is the fact that when you ask military first responders, is everything okay? We're here to talk about you and help you. It's immediately the arms get crossed, right? And you're like, oh, I don't need any help, I'm okay. Because you think in the process that if you mention any kind of challenges you're having, that might cost you your next deployment, or cost you your job, or who you are in that uniform. Mm-hmm. So what they did that was kind of ingenious was made the study about our friends who were suffering. We said, we want to talk about your experiences because we want to find out what you went through and how can we possibly help your friends. So it's kind of a mind trick if you think about it, but then that made me basically open up about, my experiences and the challenges that I was having. And what was unique in my experience that you mentioned that, I did not develop mental health anguish to the level of PTSD was while I was deployed, you mentioned the word anchor. And in discussing and becoming self-aware of the whole thing, the thing that really I held myself to in all the stuff that happens during combat was these 5 moments where they called flickers, which my mind had anchored itself to. And one of them, for example, being part of a project, providing security for a project, building water wells in schools, but being able to look into the eyes of the children, in the middle of the night, dropping off some supplies at a all girls school, which was, had nothing. The walls and the holes had holes in them, and, these were the same little brave little souls who were just trying to learn how to read and write, and they're getting acid thrown in their face by the Taliban. So, and then being able from afar, seeing them come to school and seeing the looks on their faces. And to this moment, when I talk about it, I relive it. Something that I got to experience. So, and then when I became self-aware of that at the age I was at, I was like, okay, cool. Like, can I go back to being deployed? And they're like, yes. But then when I got out of the military, and a lot of my friends started kind of suffering from mental anguish and various forms of it, they kind of like, I'm like, wait a minute. Like, if that helped me providing that kind of feedback of having that sense of purpose and it not being attributed to violence or anything, just good. And why can't I recreate that for my friends? And I was lucky enough at the time to be around a lot of good friends and supporters. This is about 3-4 years ago that, I came out with the idea. Because of course, when you come up with this idea, I'm sure when you start your practice, you're like, whoa, you're scared. Who am I? I'm not an authority to speak on this. And luckily, I had enough support, and then basically started developing this program, where it's kind of centered around volunteerism, but really, it's really much connected to the topic of today, which is loneliness and creating connection.
Exactly. It's interesting because you are referencing a couple of very important issues here. One is a kind of anchoring to the positive is a very powerful thing to do. And it seems to me that you have had a number of moments that you replay. So it's like this replaying of the positive has wired itself very powerfully inside of you. In most cases when people develop PTSD, it's the opposite. It's the anchor to the fear-based moment that gets powerfully wired or anchored. And so this replaying the positive as opposed to replaying the negative, it sounds like you tripped upon it in a way, in a lucky accident that has left you with resiliency as a resource. And the fact that you had connections, and you must be anyways inclined toward kind of warm social connection, because this is how we trip upon these things. If we have even the tiniest drop of that, then it can act like a healing balm. It can act like a target for which to continuously point ourselves towards connection and meaningful involvement. Now, just on Tuesday of last week, we had our charity had an event. It was called Healing Voices, where we brought together about 60 people, and we sang a few songs together with a choir master. And just sitting in a room with 60 people being directed on how to sing together was this remarkable experience of real joyful connection and seeing something beautiful unfold. And so I think you're talking about, people coming together in a very real way. We're woven. We're really woven and designed for connection. And when we don't have it, it really creates a lot of trouble for us. But it sounds like for you, you had these pivotal moments that allowed for you to recognize how important this is. Community service, making a difference, being connected, you probably also felt a sense of being appreciated for your actions and involvement as well. I'm wondering how you went from discharge from the military to the creation of this 3-phase program. So if you can talk a little bit about how that even happened, because it's a big undertaking, but also you've gotten involved in a 3-phase program. So if you can briefly touch on those 3 phases, that will be of interest to people.
Sure. So I used to do a lot of traveling when I used to come back from my deployments, and one of the places I went was Costa Rica, and I fell in love with the country right away. Very kind, pleasant people. They kind of slow things down. And it's a little bit ironic of a military guy being there, because this country abolished its military in 1948 and spent all its money on educating people and natural resources and all this other goodness. And being a small country, was able to do that. So it was a very kindness I'd never felt, and that they really slow down life over there. And and really connected to me, and I kept traveling there. And when I started to build, opportunities for volunteerism, when I first started looking into it, I realized that the people that we were, initially the group, the military guys, because I had a lot of friends suffering, so I kind of guinea pigged them for the first initial beginning of this curriculum, was that the poverty needed to be absolute. It needed to be really people that could use your help. You know what I mean? And in our beautiful country, there's definitely pockets of absolute poverty, but for the most part, we have amazing, systems where it assists, and there's places in place to help people.
It sounds like we're having a problem with Fareed's. Yeah, I'm not sure why that is, Fareed, but if you could just maybe hold your phone a little further away from you.
Sure.
It sounds like we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty. So go ahead. Yes, you were having this incredible experience with these beautiful people in Costa Rica and recognizing that they really did need your help. That's where you were.
Yeah, there was help there, but it was also it was safe. It's one of the safest countries in the hemisphere. So, I would never try to do this. For example, right now I would go to Sierra Leone or Syria. There's absolute poverty there, but it's not safe. So when I began I'm like, why can't I share this again with my friends, right? Because in creating this volunteerism, so phase 2 is basically the volunteerism part, which is a small part of the program, really, if you think about it, because it's a 1-year program. We spend approximately 7 to 10 days in Costa Rica. But what it's used as is a catalyst type thing for volunteerism aspect of it. So when I came back, I shared the idea, I want to take a group of veterans and friends to Costa Rica to get involved in volunteerism because it makes me feel good, and it makes me to recreate those moments I got to have in Afghanistan, right? Which gave me an immense amount of purpose, right? Because in the military, while I was in the military and maybe some of the first responders, your sense of purpose is always attributed to this uniform, right? So I can only be good if there's a war, a police officer needs crime, a firefighter needs fire. So when that uniform gets taken away from you for retirement or mental or physical health, it's incredibly depriving. You've lost your sense of purpose. You can give me all the pills and bags of money you want. I don't have purpose. I'm reliant on things.
Right. That's one of the biggest things. This idea that we have to have meaning, purpose in life, and if we become too attached to one mechanism, we lose our freedom. Really,
exactly.
Because we cannot be free if we are absolutely stuck on only one way of life having to unfold. It's a really rigid place to be. So what a nice thing that you started to be so open and willing in this way.
And I'm definitely, just to give you, so I don't take too much credit, I'm a byproduct of, this study, which was basically mental health experts. And, to everyone who's listening, going to see a mental health expert when there's nothing wrong is absolutely amazing. Don't wait for it. So basically, and that's how it started. And so I started basically writing some mental health experts. Dr. John Whalen, who is our chief mental health expert, reached out to me and liked the idea and basically started helping. And, of course, a lot of the volunteers, a lot of close friends of mine, Jonathan Wismer, Hamid, Samab, these are guys that stuck with me from day one. And we kind of started, and a lot of veterans, of course, around as well. And we started building the program, starting with a screening process. Because Camp Aftermath, first and foremost, is not a suicide prevention program. Right. The type of personnel we're looking for, guys and girls, have gone through the mental health realm, have kind of become self-aware, and now kind of looking for the next step. Like, what do I do now, right? How do I find my next thing? How do I develop the connections to even find my next thing?
So I love that you say that, Fareed. Just the awareness that it's so important to have things in place so that you can make those next steps in life. That it's not necessarily, this is not necessarily for a program for somebody who is in the thick of PTSD and just has not been able to stabilize it all. This is for somebody who has some self-awareness, some resources in place, and an opportunity to take the time to go and join this group and start to make meaning in life beyond the version of the universe that includes just their uniform. Now, I'm just going to go to our emails and say hi to Bryce, who just sent us an email. And Bryce says, this is a touching subject, and this is for you, Fareed. He says, praise to your guest. How can we support him and his cause? Thank you. And for those people who do want to support Camp Aftermath, you could just go online, campaftermath.org. Is there any other way, Fareed, that people can get in touch with you or donate to your cause?
Contact emails there. You can email me directly at freed@aftermathassociation.org. That's aftermathassociation.org. Or you can just contact us through the website. As we have social media platforms, Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Please feel free to use any of those means to reach out to us.
And that includes, too, for people who might be a good fit for the 3-phase program, the screening,
100%.
which I think you're starting already, and then there's a new trip, I believe you said, to Costa Rica. And it's only for 10 people, right?
We try to keep it very intimate. So Roto 2 is happening on February 28th. It's starting. We try to keep it no more than 10 people, but to keep it intimate, because it's not about just getting a ton of people through the program, right? It's kind of about making it as vulnerable as we can be, as being okay, because that's the major part of it is to kind of strip away. This is not the place where you go tell your one-time in Afghanistan stories or a really bad call. We don't identify ourselves no longer with the bad things that happened to us, right?
Wow, that's brilliant, because this can be actually very problematic. When we run a couple of group programs at our clinic through our charity, the Trauma Practice for Healthy Community, and a couple of the programs, one is called Resiliency and Recovery, and it's really only about learning strategies for dealing with physiological arousal and teaching people how to come together in a group and feel supported by that group while they're learning their kind of strategies. And then we have another one that's really about leaning in. That's really more about connecting with others in a meaningful way and learning strategies to do that, because after trauma, sometimes people just feel so unable to feel safe in connecting. And this program, again, it's not about storytelling. It's about connecting in a way that makes people feel like this can be a safe way for me to regain those social connector skills. So it sounds like that's a really important part of your program as well. But from our previous conversation, I understand that you're not trying to do it alone. You have some mental health support on the trip as well. Can you talk about that?
Yes, we have Dr. Whalen, who oversees the whole program from a mental health aspect. He's a registered psychologist, 10 years in the military. And then we have Dr. Karen Shu, who I should correct myself. She is a clinical psychologist. She's just studied in neuroscience. And then we have Lise Preston, who is a social worker, and we have Dr. Daniel Taylor, who's an Ottawa-based psychologist as well. On this current rotation, the Roto 2, we'll have Lise Preston, and we have Dr. Karen Shu deploying with us and providing the mental health support throughout all 3 phases. Of course, Dr. Whalen will be, and Dr. Daniel Taylor will be providing support as well.
Beautiful. Now, I'm going to come right back to you, Fareed, but I want to reference a few other things. I want to hear everybody stay tuned for, the phase 3 details of the program that Fareed is running. But let's listen for a few minutes to a video on loneliness and just a normal person going through her life and struggling with loneliness and how common this can be, because I don't want you to be left with the impression that I think this is only something for military first responders. This is an epidemic, and really just lovely, great people are struggling with feelings of terrible loneliness, and we need to start taking this seriously because the level of suffering around this is profound. So just stand by and take this in.
Humans, by nature, we're social creatures, and with social media, sometimes we feel like we're more connected than ever, but are we really? More than ever, a lot of Americans say they're socially isolated, and that not only leads to emotional stress, loneliness can actually be life-threatening.
It's been said no man is an island, but we've all felt like castaways from time to time.
For Jessica O'Lean, it happened a few years ago. She had moved from New York to Portland, Oregon, thinking it would improve her life and running.
Kind of had this image of myself with a bigger place, maybe seeming more successful.
Those things happened, but she didn't feel any better.
I just felt kind of dead inside. Like I felt very emotionally disconnected. And I think that's when I started realizing that I was like feeling really lonely.
She had acquaintances, went on dates, had plenty of friends on Facebook, but she was waking up in the middle of the night, worried that she had no deep connections to anyone around her. So you're surrounded by people, and yet you're feeling lonely.
And then you feel lonely, yeah. I think that.
Which I think people don't expect.
No.
I think people think of loneliness as, a hermit in a cave who never comes out.
Well, I think a lot of people probably are lonely, and they just don't acknowledge it.
Jessica's experience is not unique, and researchers are taking notice. Some say America is in the grips of a loneliness epidemic. The effects go beyond emotional distress. They can lead to serious health problems. Feeling lonely can heighten this sense of perception of our environment as threatening. These physiological or biological responses that are preparing us for threat are much like a stress response, and this can put us at increased risk for a variety of physical illnesses. Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstad has studied the physical risks of loneliness. She says social disconnection can be deadlier than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness carries a stronger risk than the risk associated with obesity, physical inactivity, and air pollution.
Now, remember, one of the things that does happen when people are feeling lonely is you start to turn to all sorts of ways to reduce your loneliness. I mean, it just makes sense that, now you're starting to really feel terrible and you're looking for ways to alleviate this and you're struggling with connecting with others. So you start to maybe turn to bad habits. Maybe you're just sitting on the couch and watching TV for too many hours a day, or you're drinking, or you're not eating properly. Whatever it is, these things also have an impact on your overall health and well-being. So for sure, this can be, a problem that just builds on itself. So let's go to some of the emails that we're receiving. This one is from Elise. And Elise says, I often wondered if loneliness, sadness, or loneliness depression is not really loneliness at all, but some other mental trauma that someone may be going through. So, that's actually a really important thing to consider, Elise, because certainly, we could be struggling from a major depressive disorder. We may have PTSD. We might have something else that's causing difficulties in our life. We may be in an environment that's very toxic or unsupportive. So certainly there are other factors. And it's important to start to really spend some time, reflect on what's going on in your life, work with a mental health professional so that you can start teasing some of these elements apart, because it can be really complicated. I wouldn't want to presume that I could know, whether somebody's going through a mental health crisis that is as a result of some chemical imbalance or exposure to trauma or a toxic workplace, without really doing the work with that individual. But it certainly can contribute to and lead to lonely feelings or worsen pre-existing lonely feelings. But one of the things just to keep in mind is if you have some good people in your life, to make it a point of reaching out to them and really trying to be open and honest and have kind of truthful, heart-based connections where you can feel that emotional support. And that should teach you a little bit about, whether this is strictly a loneliness issue or if there are other mental health considerations, because we don't want to undermine how big a deal that could be. I mean, that could be everything, right? So that's a very important thing to consider. And thank you so much for bringing that up, Elise. Very important for us to consider. And now we've heard from Anne, who says, isn't loneliness sometimes good for us so that we can be in touch with ourselves and meditate about our lives? Do we really need to be around people all the time? With today's technology, everyone seems to be a narcissistic person on Facebook. They seem to want to tell everyone everything about their lives. Well, this is a very rich comment, and thank you very much for that. Personally, I think it's really important for most people to spend a little time on their own. I do not think that being alone is the same as loneliness at all. And I'm going to tell you a little personal story. I grew up in a home. My parents were first-generation Canadians, so we did not have a huge social network, and I was very aware of the kind of my parents being very busy, you know, having to do all the things they needed to do to make, you know, life in their new country as safe and good as they could for their kids. They were really good parents, and yet, you know, we didn't have that great of a connection. So I remember as a child being aware of kind of lonely feelings and loneliness. And that loneliness was actually driven by not having connections. And so it wasn't so much that I couldn't be alone, but that we didn't have that level of social network, and so it was very noticeable. Today, you know, I really value spending time on my own. I'm really busy in my life, and to be honest, I don't feel lonely very often, but you know, if I was having feelings of loneliness, which are absolutely normal, you know, I would do all the stuff that I would suggest other people do. You know, make it a priority to connect to others in a meaningful way, not through social media. I really don't think that leads to feelings of connection. It often leads to feelings of comparison because, you know, as you said, you know, everybody's out there kind of talking about, you know, their lives, and maybe it seems narcissistic to you. I think, you know, what we do is we post very filtered versions of our life, and it can look very unreal, and, you know, people can look at it and compare themselves to what they're seeing. So, you know, I hope that, you know, you do take time to meditate about your life, and you don't feel pressured to always be with somebody all the time. But one of the key factors to keep in mind is if you are with people and you still feel lonely, that's a good indicator that you are struggling with loneliness. So keep that in mind. And then we hear from Evan, and Evan says, where is the program located? Is there a cost to it? How are you chosen for the program? Does it go by severity of mental health issues? Thank you. So this I'm going to bring back to Fareed, because you have the answers to all of those things, Fareed, and thank you for sticking around with us.
Oh, no problem. A very interesting topic indeed. So the first question, where is it located? We're Ottawa-based, but our participants, being from the first responders and military, active and veterans, are from all over Canada. So you don't have to be from Ottawa necessarily. And your severity, as I mentioned, it's not a suicide prevention program. I mean, so we do screening process, and the major themes we look for in speaking to the participant and also their mental health experts. So we ask and we fill out the proper documents to have a quick conversation with your mental health expert to kind of, you know, include them in this process, is to make sure there's no addiction issues, and also the fact that there's not going to be, you're not a harm to yourself or anyone else in the program. Yeah. And also being in group therapy, it's very important to try to, as much as possible, get someone at the same level, right? At the very least, you can 100% be assured that this program will not set you back. So if you are kind of, you know, in a different space, you're not going to be, you know, in a good place. You're not going to go there and someone's not going to be talking about, you know, actively trying to take their life like the day before. Something that could, you know, it might be traumatic to you, might set you back, you know, because that's sometimes happened in the past, and in various vocations programs, whatnot. So there is a cost, yes, and there's a cost, and it's $2,000 for the whole year program. and that money is not necessarily for the cost part of it, but it's also ensuring that this program requires and demands skin in the game, if you will. Dr. Brown, you can probably kind of attest to this. When you give advice to someone for free, they're like, "Oh, thanks, doc. This is great." As soon as you start charging them $100 an hour, they're like, "Oh, let me write this down." So kind of we try to make sure people have skin in the game. They're invested. Of course, the money, you don't have to have it right away. We have payment plans and whatnot. And if you come back and you say this was completely a waste of my time, it's refundable. But like, I guarantee you won't feel that way. But I don't know. Was there another question?
Yeah. So you know what? I think one of the things that you're referencing to is that if there is a cost, but I think that Camp Aftermath actually covers some of the cost. They have to fly there. I think you told me that.
Yeah, that $2,000. Well, first of all volunteers and mental health experts do not get paid. Everyone is absolutely doing this for free. There is zero overhead. So the cost, we do a lot of fundraising at grassroots level to make this happen. That includes the project that we do in Costa Rica, that we fund and we build a flight, all the logistics and administrative accountants, all these requirements what it takes to run a registered charity in Canada.
Yeah, which is a lot.
Yeah. So the volunteers and mental health experts, there is, everyone pays their own way. No one is paid.
Right. Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you, and that's very helpful. So I'm going to go back to listening to this clip.
Why this surge in solitude? Researchers cite a perfect storm of factors. Fewer people getting married, more of us living alone, children moving farther away from parents, people working from home, and yes, the internet and social media are definitely factors. Dr. Brian Primack initially wanted to do a study about how social media was making us more connected. He was stunned by what he found.
For every level of increase in social media use, there was an increase in loneliness.
People who go to social media looking to feel better about themselves, Dr. Primack says, often see friends and acquaintances living highly edited lives.
People who use more social media might start to get the impression that everybody else is close to each other. Everybody else has more friends than I have, has a more successful life than I have.
Dr. Primack also says we feel any negative feedback we get online much more strongly than compliments. After 8 months feeling lost in Portland, Jessica wrote an article for Slate talking openly about her loneliness. Strangers still write to her for advice. She tells them the best thing she did was to admit out loud what was wrong.
Being vulnerable to other people and telling them about your experiences is huge.
So you found opening up about yourself helped you make connections.
So I think that is the most interesting thing because, for most people, when we feel lonely, we feel shame, and we have a tendency to not want to share that we feel lonely. There tends to be this stigma that goes with lonely feelings that then lead to more isolation and more loneliness. Like we'll tell ourselves that it's our fault or something is particularly flawed with us as human beings, when in fact sometimes it can just be circumstantial. I'm new to the city and I haven't got my feet on the ground yet, and I haven't built my network the way I need to, or I'm working at a job that is so demanding that it takes me away from doing the things that I really need to do and putting connections first. And I think with the program that Fareed is telling us about, it's a really interesting model of connection. So that's what I'd really like to hear from you about, Fareed. On the trip, can you tell me a little bit about the connection part and what's happening there and what you see as a result?
Yeah, definitely. Connections is basically kind of the inception of this whole thing. As I said, volunteerism is kind of used as a guide, right? And that goes back to how I was helped. And basically, it's a way of, hey, guys, we're going to go to Costa Rica and we're going to help these people that need our help. And they're more open, we're more open, especially in the masculine side, to do that because it's for other people, right? Because in this job and this requirement to help other people, right? And then what they discover at the inception part, they're not really, they are helping them, but that's almost a byproduct, right? They're really helping themselves by creating these connections. What does that look like? It looks like so in phase one, we do the screening. We also start introducing the participants to themselves, and they start being vulnerable and opening up. And then when you realize that you're not the only one that feels this loneliness, that there's nothing wrong with you, right? That you can speak about it out loud. You don't have to be Mr. Macho Guy, right? And we get down to those real kind of vulnerable layers. And then other people start talking about their loneliness, and just like the video said, that itself is very empowering to be able to say it out loud. And then for this group of people that we're working with, and then basically when we go to Costa Rica, part two, phase two of this is when we go build the project. We're not like building it and then someone else moves in. So when we go, we eat what the locals eat. We sleep where they sleep. Of course, it's comfortable and air conditioned, but like we don't go to the Hyatt, for example. We don't go to the Hilton, right? And we look into the eyes of the people that we're helping constantly. We create connections with them, right? We share things. And that, basically, they're getting what I got in Afghanistan, right? Without the violence, right?
Yep.
And so they're creating these anchors and like, holy crap, like I can do this. And then also bringing the point home that this doesn't have to be in Costa Rica, right? Because part of our program is not just giving them a week in Costa Rica that they feel good about themselves. It's really the phase three, the most important phase. Everyone wants to focus on Costa Rica. It's just a catalyst because we, with their family and their mental health experts, help enroll them in charities and foundations back here in Canada and follow up with them for a year, which is phase three, following up on a weekly basis to follow up and basically hold each other accountable. And we help enroll them in charities. So that sense of feedback is constantly coming. But more importantly, we get to the most important part, which you mentioned, connection. When you go volunteer at an organization, you're going to be surrounded by like-minded people who are giving their time to do the same thing as you. And you're more likely to feel connected to them, to share with them, and to kind of, you volunteer here where you can also volunteer over here. And there's these things that we can do that can get together. And coming out of isolation for the military and first responders was huge. Because not only do you face kind of the normal, you mentioned the very toxic cycle of feeling lonely, isolation, and lonely, but in the military role, especially, Dr. Whalen talks about this, is this narcissistic view that we have, because when we joined the military, we were told that we were special, right? Like these are civilians and we are military. And there's nothing wrong with that. They had to do that to justify the things that we're going to do. And I'm not talking about combat. I'm talking about missing anniversaries, birthdays, all posting. But then when you get out of the military, there's no basic training on the back end to tell you, hey, these civilian people are just as lonely as you. And the video clip that you played, that girl, it's every one of us, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So,
it's today it seems to be normal daily living, because there were many generations of people who would come together and they would be part of social networks that were not online but actually real face-to-face networks where people would come together and they would bowl together, they'd read books together, they'd go to religious ceremonies together, they'd be involved in community events, and there are fewer and fewer of those kinds of organizations that are thriving. The numbers of people who get involved in those kinds of activities, even in religious organizations, the numbers have dwindled significantly. And the numbers of people even, joining, let's say, bowling clubs, the number of people who were involved in just playing bowling together reduced significantly since the 70s to today. And that's not to say that bowling is the answer. It's coming together with other people. But we seem to have slipped right out of that and into this media deluge where, our sense of connection is watching somebody on social media as opposed to actually having a conversation, a real face-to-face conversation. And one of the things that I always suggest that people do, if they're feeling this sense of disconnection and loneliness, it's a multi-stepped self-intervention of sorts in which you get involved in regular activities that engage you, whether it's in some kind of personal or self-growth or spiritual life or exercise or something that is creative or artistic. But the whole idea is that you do some kind of searching in your own community for different groups or activities that come together on a regular basis, whether it's once a week or once a month, or, in some cases you might be going 2-3 times a week. Maybe you've joined a small gym that runs certain programs, or you've joined an exercise boot camp and they meet 3 times a week, and you're seeing the same people every week over and over again. It's that showing up and seeing another person and being engaged in something that involves other people in real time that can be a very, very powerful part. Now, I love the fact that you were talking about volunteerism, because I think that could be a really big piece of the puzzle as well. But let's hear the rest of this story first.
Always. I mean, it's the whole thing, isn't it?
She moved back to New York, and 5 years later, she's a children's book author and illustrator.
My creativity has been, the biggest blessing. And that also allowed me to be more open to other people, which has definitely helped me be less lonely.
What's life right now for you?
I'm working on a new book, have my book coming out right now, moving in with my partner.
Life is good.
Life is good.
Jessica is the perfect example of something else the experts say, which is being creative, and sharing that creative work with others can form more substantial connections, whether it's writing or art or music. And guys, we're going to look at more solutions tomorrow in part 2.
So this is a really good example of a person who has recognized on a very deep level that she personally is struggling. The name of the person who, the woman who was speaking was Jessica Olien, and it's Olien, if people want to read a little bit more about her article on feeling lonely and what she went through. And now she's a children's author, and she wrote the book Right Now, and I think she's working on another one as well. And I'm going to go back to our emails and just say hi. Joe is writing, "Hi, Dr. Baranowski, a very good and important topic this month. Social media is the killer of communication, intimacy, and is the cause of a lot of loneliness. In today's society, if people are not online communicating with other people, they do not interact with people right next to them, etc." I know I've seen that so many times. You probably have as well, Fareed. You can be, sitting in a waiting room and people don't even look at each other, or you could be showing up for some kind of event, and instead of people seeing each other, there's this kind of holding your phone in front of your face kind of thing that keeps us so isolated and so separate. And it kind of, because I didn't grow up with a cell phone in my hand, a lot of people from a bit of an earlier generation, when I see it, I always think it's interesting because it doesn't strike me as a kind of typical way that I would think about reacting when I go to a social setting. But I see a lot of people do it, pulling out their phone right away as if it's their buffer from, communicating with another person. So, yeah, it can be really tough, Joe. So Joe also says, so they are, in fact, lonely if they're not typing to someone else online. We've lost our human element to live communication. So, yeah, that is a really big thing. So, Fareed, I want to hear about Phase 3 and how you get people engaged and stay engaged.
So Phase 3, basically we set up Phase 3 at the end of Phase 2, and that's where our mental health experts start talking about how to bring this experience back home. So when we come back, when we come back to Canada, we don't go right home. We spend 2 days in Toronto, which is where which home base is going to be this rotation. And we spent 2 days together living in a communal space, and we set what are called SMART goals. So we set goals that we set in our personal, spiritual, and personal lives. We journal. That's one part of this program is developing positive habits, which is meditation, yoga. We expose a wide array of positive habits, which they can pick and choose from. It's not by no way a manuscript on how to be happy if you do these things. But we start setting goals, and then we hold each other accountable. But how we do that is that once a week, initially for the first couple of months, then once every 2 weeks, and then once a month, we follow up on video teleconferencing. So it doesn't matter where you're from in Canada. We meet up, and then we check in, right? So we do a group check-in. How's everyone doing? It doesn't have to be all like it was an amazing week. We talk about our challenges, how we got through them. We also talk about the goals that we had set the week before. So if I would have said that, I was going to try to get to the gym at least twice this week, I would talk about if I did it or not. And because I have connections with people and people who I hold accountable, and I'm accountable to them, I'm more likely to go to the gym, right? Initially, right? Because I don't want to let people down, right?
Yeah. So, it's a really helpful thing when we have people in our lives who we're sharing our life with in real time, who we know we're going to see them again, and they're going to say, "How did it go this week with the gym?" And then all of a sudden you're like, "Well, we get to talk about our experience. Was it hard? Was it easy?" It's like it's not about shaming; it's about connecting.
And part of this is we create group chat rooms for them. So, and this has nothing to do with Camp Aftermath or mental health. It's just simply when you create a group chat room, you notice that the participants actually motivate themselves. So one guy will be on the chat room, talking about something inspiring. He's finally enrolled. As one of the main things the guys are finding is being creativity, whether it be writing or painting. It's huge. It's actually superseded in volunteerism in some aspects, right? They've created new connections through that. But then the other guy who was kind of nervous to show up to his volunteer day hears that this other guy just did this inspiring thing, and he felt compelled to share it on the group chat, and he goes and does what he's supposed to do, what he said he was going to do. And so you see, that's connection. That's nothing to do with Camp Aftermath or mental health experts. It's just people finally starting to feel the power of connection. And basically, it's very powerful and amazing to watch when you see these guys just helping each other out. But at the same time, understanding that, we're not creating this group for a new thing for you to be reliant on. This is not another military unit, right? So you're very much kind of also exposed to and also encouraged to create your own connections outside the group. It doesn't just have to be one, just like you mentioned, right? This rigid kind of this is my one thing of purpose type thing. So and through volunteerism, through finding their creativity, they create new compassions when they meet other artists or creative writers or sailing clubs. Even you see new connections being made all the time. So phase 3 is basically kind of following up with them, and so it's just not something they did, in Costa Rica. It's not just this 1 week, right? And that we really try to address that part of the follow-up. It's very important, and I don't believe any of our mental health experts would be supporting us if it was just a volunteerism trip to Costa Rica. As amazing as that is, it's really making sure this momentum keeps going when they get back home in Canada.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I mean, this is something that we share in common, Fareed, the idea that when we bring people together, there can be this beautiful, organic development of meaningful connection that goes way beyond the initial activity and starts to create kind of a foundation for connection that, it just gets stronger and stronger as we put energy into it. And I think that's the real thing is, like, if you're feeling lonely today, and this really is for everybody who's listening, if you're feeling lonely today, pay attention to that, because sometimes our most difficult feelings are really, an indicator of what our next step must be. And so it's not that you should feel lonely and then try to suppress that or, not pay attention to it or not feel it. Feel it, and be gentle with yourself. Start to identify areas in your life where you can make a small shift where you could be open to a new thing, where you can allow yourself to see, the possibility and be open-minded to trying something different. It does not need to be something you've done before. It could be something that's really unique. Baya Vose is the host of The Art of Connection, and she's been involved in the development of a series looking at experts all over the world for creating different strategies for creating a fulfilled life. And one of the things that Baya recognized is that it's so crucial to have relationships that are nourished. So what that really means is you have to take the time to nourish, to create, to be responsible for building strong connections, because this is what can really transform your life. The minute you start noticing that you've got some warm connections, it can be the difference between feeling, life is a struggle, to life feels kind of warm, connected, and meaningful. And I'm going to read something that was shared with me last week in preparation for our charitable event, The Healing Voices. And this I find really, really interesting. So this is from a woman who participated in our resiliency group, and she says, I didn't expect the positive impact it actually had on me. I wasn't prepared for the results I would get. I experienced, so she says that the experience she had, the sharing of healing, connection, and relief and understanding, that was surprising to her. The group pulled her out of emotional isolation and allowed her to connect with others who were experiencing the same emotions. She learned tools to move forward and wanted to, because she had the support of the group, and that each group member would share successes and failures in a safe and supportive environment, and that the connections that she made had and continue to have a positive impact on her own life and emotional well-being. And I think this is something that is pretty consistent in what I hear from the individuals who come to the groups, because they find it so surprising, that sense of connection, not feeling so alone and unheard. In the groups, the focus has to be feeling seen and heard in a meaningful way, because that can be one of the toughest things. I mean, we can learn all sorts of techniques, but when you create an environment, like it sounds like you are doing, Fareed, when you create an environment that helps people to feel included, and that what they're doing has a meaning, that they can live their life in a way that is meaningful, that can be part of a community that goes beyond whatever their career was or whatever notions they had about their career. There are a couple of really interesting TED Talks that I've been listening to in preparation for this conversation today, and one is by Will Wright, and his TED Talk is called Loneliness is Literally Killing Us, and he writes about being a healthcare tech entrepreneur and how he basically spent all his time working, and if he got invitations to do something, he might do it, but he was so work focused that even if he did show up to something, he'd pull out that smartphone and he'd start, doing something, answering emails or, responding to some kind of a work demand, and, more and more isolation and fewer personal invitations for connection. So take this time today, everybody, and really ask yourself, are you giving time that is needed to warmly embrace the growth of connection in your life today? I know, Fareed, that from everything that you've said, this is a real important driving force in the work that you do. I want to thank you very much for spending the time with us and telling us about the programs that you're working on, and I hope that we'll have more conversations, because clearly the work you're doing is absolutely on alignment with, what I believe in and what I see as well, the importance of bringing people together in a meaningful way. So any last words from you, Fareed? Anything else you want to say to our listeners?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, honestly, for having me on. And also anyone who wants to reach out to us to learn more, please go to our website and our social media platforms, Camp Aftermath. And thank you so much. And I hope to have more conversations with you and keep this momentum going.
Fantastic. And again, thank you so very much for the work you're doing as well, and having created campaftermath.org and making that program available to military, paramilitary, first responders, veterans, and the community that you are focused on serving. And I hope you and all of our listeners today have a gentle day. And just so that you're aware, next month I will not be here, and we will be doing a rebroadcast of one of our popular shows. And I hope you'll join us for that. And to everybody, have a gentle day, and I will hear from you hopefully in March. Be well, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.